North Atlantic, March 1943. Snow needles sting the skin. The sea is black glass, splintered by white fangs, and 36 merchant ships creep across a killing field. Somewhere ahead, a U-boat listens. Diesel heart silent, ears pressed to the ocean. On the destroyer escort USS Avery, D-411. A mess cook with grease on his sleeves asks the captain a question nobody in the United States Navy has ever dared to put into words. Sir, what if we make the ocean louder than they can hear? And that is how the most ridiculous back-galley idea in the North Atlantic turned into a weapon. 1. Smoke, coffee, silence. The Avery's wardroom smelled like burnt chicory and wool. Ensigns hunched over a chart that looked like a heartbeat. Convoy columns, zigzag patterns, escort loops. The HX 229 Convoy, grain, nitrates, airplanes and crates. Worth more than a bank and twice as fragile. Chief Sonarman Lutz tapped the paper with a scarred knuckle. They're here. Trim their diesels, ride the layer, and just listen. You didn't have to add, and then they kill you, because the faces said it. Cook third class, Joe read. Malloy hovered with the coffee pot. He wasn't supposed to speak. Cooks didn't talk tactics. But he'd spent 3 months watching a hunter he couldn't see. Captain Abrams noticed the way Red poured coffee the way a man lays a fuse. Careful, angle, patience. You've got a thought, Malloy, Abrams said. Spit it. Red felt the room tilt. Sir, the sound man keeps saying the ocean's too quiet. So, make it not quiet. Drown their ears. Let's laugh out his nose. You can't turn up the Atlantic. Red set the pot down. I can. Give me the galley chains, 2 brass plates, and the busted prop shaft from that torpedo davit. I'll make you a rattlejack. Silence. Then the storm boomed against the hull like an angry fist. 2. Why submarines win. That night, Lutz taught Red what he was up against. In the sonar shack, the headphones murmured with rain, cavitation, distant ice, an orchestra of ghosts. Lutz slid a pencil. German hydrophones aren't magic, but a U-boat is a cathedral for sound. They stop the diesels, drift under the layer, and the Atlantic becomes a stethoscope. A convoy screw beat, thud, 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 gives bearing. A pattern, a path. Red listened. Somewhere inside the hiss was a heartbeat that wasn't his. So if the problem is a pattern, he said, break it. Break what? The ocean. 3. The impossible ask. Abrams didn't run a democracy, but he ran a ship that listened. He'd survived 2 winters off Iceland, and knew good ideas often wore stupid clothes. He called for the bosun, the engineer, and the gunnery officer. They heard Red out. The bosun scratched its salt-burned knuckles. You're proposing we drag a junkyard behind us? Not junk, Red said, eyes alive. Noise. Not the steady kind they tuned for. The dirty kind they can't filter. The engineer, Lieutenant Dana, sat forward. Random broadband racket, outboard of our screws, off our stern, farther the better. If a U-boat's hydrophones think the convoy's there when we're here, he didn't have to finish. Abrams made the call a captain must never get wrong. Malloy, you've got 4 hours in anything that isn't welded down. But if you foul my screws, I'll feed you to the North Atlantic. Red grinned like a condemned man given a reprieve. Aye, sir. 4. Birth of the Rattlejack. They stole the galley's chain curtains. They unbolted the warp prop shaft from a torpedo crane, the one everyone tripped over and cursed. Red riveted 2 brass platter plates face to face with a fistful of nuts in between. He strung tin cans, spare shell, casing rings, and broken wrenches like a jeweler of chaos. The bosun contributed a drag vane, a scrap of steel with holes drilled through to pull the contraption astern and keep it from planing. In wind that shaved skin, they heaved the monstrosity over the stern with 100 fathoms of manila hawser. It sank until the hawser went taut, the Avery shuddered, and Dana swore as the winch squealed. Start slow, the captain barked. The shaft spun. At 10 knots it began to sing, a metallic wail, a demon tambourine. At 12 knots it screamed, Rattle on clatter on roar. So violent you felt in your teeth. The crew named it in 5 seconds. The Rattlejack. 5. The ocean answers. Contact bearings 085. Very faint, probably below the layer. Lutz shouted from sonar. The convoy's starboard wing was where a patient killer would sit. Abrams glanced at the plot. Make us the shiny coin, he said. Take us outboard and drag that hell behind us. The Avery peeled right. The convoy a dim cathedral of shadows to port. The Rattlejack screamed, a chorus of abused metal. Inside a boat, 100 feet down, Oberleutnant Kruger shut his eyes and listened. Ocean. Convoy. A clean screw beat. No, a howling storm of metal somewhere astern, drawing his ears like a magnet draws filings. He cursed modernity. He trusted his ears. Hard as starboard, bring hydrophones to bear. He didn't see, couldn't see, what the ocean now looked like, a false city of sound that Red Malloy had built out of garbage and nerve. 6. First blood, maybe. Bearing shift. Let's barked. Target crossing our stern to starboard. Range closing. Depth charges, Abrams said. He didn't raise his voice. Pattern able. Hedgehog ready. Behold for contact. The Avery's stern yawned, racks tilting, greased ash pans sliding. K-thunk, K-thunk, K-thunk as depth charges rolled. The sea behind erupted into boiling green craters that slapped the sky. Any hits? Dana asked. Let's listen to the after silence. Sometimes silence means death. Sometimes it means a smarter enemy. Unknown, he said, mouth dry. But he's not where he thought we were. The convoy slid by alive. On a freighter named Prairie Belle, a kid from Kansas looked at the destroyer that howled like a banshee and decided sailors were all insane and all angels. 7. The letter and the threat. 2 days later, Abrams got an encoded signal from COMSDLANT. Something curt that translated roughly to, "What the hell are you dragging, and why are my radio men complaining about a new kind of noise?" He sent back a report that read like a physics problem scribbled in grease pencil. Improvised Toad acoustic noisemaker appears to degrade hostile passive detection and bearing accuracy. Request evaluation. He didn't write, invented by my cook. He wrote, origin, shipboard innovation. Red shrugged when he heard. Sir, cut me out if it helps. Just keep the thing. Abrams shook his head. The Navy can have its pride, but it's going to get your idea whether it likes your apron or not. 8. How you prove a miracle. Miracles are stories until numbers make them true. Lutz, who'd once wanted to teach algebra in Ohio, set about counting. Bearing shifts before and after. Contact fades. Attack runs forced early. He plotted them against time with a stub of pencil and a strip of butcher paper Red stole from the galley. A crude scatter turned into a curve. If a U-boat tracks on passive only, let's explain to the wardroom, he needs a clean narrowband signature. Blade rate harmonics, machinery lines. We're giving him broadband trash. We're filling his ears with pennies until he can't find a quarter. Red said, we're busking the Atlantic. Even the engineer laughed at that. 9. The wolf pack tries again. Night. Snow. The convoy slogged on. Radio men caught a flurry of high-speed bursts. German wolf packs had cute code names, but their work was tooth and iron. The Avery's Rattlejack sang the same ugly lullaby. 2 other escorts improvised their own. One with anchor chain and 2 ammo lockers. Another with a box of busted spanners that sounded like a carpenter being murdered. Multiple bearings, multiple depths, Lutz reported. They don't agree with each other. I think we're ghosting them. Abrams allowed himself a sin called hope. Bring the Avery across the bow. Let them chase an echo. Beneath, Kruger chewed at a pencil and hated the ocean for lying. Every time he turned, the sound moved the way no ship moved. He imagined a convoy going in circles, a ship reversing time, a sea with trick mirrors. He blamed bad luck, bad weather, bad training. Everything but a cook with a stupid grin. 10. Counterpunch. Clear as contacts come right before something hits you. Lutz stiffened. High-speed transient, torpedo rail slam, bearing 215. Abrams didn't wait. Hard over. Full ahead. The Avery shuddered the bow bit foam. Make your racket scream. The Rattlejack went to 15 knots of madness. The ship heaved. Men slid. Somewhere in their wake something long and hungry streaked toward the loudest thing in the ocean, and found it behind the ship. The torpedo ran under a curtain of trash noise and detonated in a geyser that lifted the stern like a horse bucking. Platus hum. Teeth clicked, but the screws kept turning. Closest I ever want to come, Dana breathed. Noted, Abrams said, putting a hand on the bulkhead like you pat a living animal. We owe the cook a steak. Make it two, Red said from the doorway, pale but grinning. One for me. One for whatever saint covers idiots. 11. The engineers arrive. 3 days after landfall in Argentia, a two-stripe bureau of ships engineer named Harity boarded with a briefcase and a frown. He stared at the Rattlejack as if it were a crime scene. This violates every hydrodynamic principle I respect, Harity said. It also saved 36 ships, Abrams replied. Harity squatted by the mess of chains and brass plates. He took notes, measurements, samples. If we suspended tune slats, he muttered, half to himself, and drove them so they cavitate at controlled frequencies. If we put on a tow Y-boom to keep it outside the ship's acoustic shadow. If we design it so it screams in the band's U-boat hydrophones love, he glanced up. Cook, how'd you think of this? Red wiped his hands on his apron. Sir, I was trying to sleep. The ship's pantry door rattles whenever we hit 12 knots. It rattles at just the wrong frequency to ignore. Harity stared. Then he laughed, a short, dry sound. Good God, we've been spending Carnegie money, and the solution was a pantry door. He went back ashore with the Rattlejack's bones in his case. Within a month, a prototype came back with a tidy label. FXR, towed acoustic decoy. Sailors called it what sailors call things, a foxer. On British ships, the name stuck too. Red called it my noisy kid. The Navy called it classified. 12. New weapons, Old Sea. You don't want a war with one gadget. U-boats learned. They listened around the noise. They attacked from angles that made the foxer a lure, not a shield. They fired new torpedoes that homed on the loudest sound. And for a terrifying month, the ocean turned into a place where noise meant being hunted. Then the escorts learned to tow decoys even louder than themselves, to mask their screws, to split their acoustic signature into lies. Operations research men, Blackett's Circus, slide rules, and chalk proved what cooks and chiefs already knew. Fewer depth charges, drops smarter. Escorts placed where math said, not pride. Convoy as organism, not mosaic of heroes. But none of it would have mattered without the idea that made officers flinch and the ocean snarl. Make it too loud to hear. 13. The letter home. On a Sunday with fog like wet velvet, Red found a quiet corner, a stub of pencil, and paper that smelled faintly of oranges. He wrote to his mother in Duluth, who believed the ocean was for postcards. Dear Ma, don't worry. I feed men who chase wolves, and most days the wolves go hungry. We tied a bunch of pots and plates to the sea and told it to sing louder than death. It worked. Please don't tell Father O'Malley. He'll think I'm taking the Lord's name in vain. You're Joseph. He didn't add that at night. He still heard the Rattlejack in his dreams. And sometimes he woke to a quiet so deep it felt like a mouth closing. 14. The gift and the guilt. Abrams called Red to the bridge at sunset. The sea was an iron sheet hammered flat, the horizon a knife line. He held out a small, stupid thing, a brass nut from the original Rattlejack drilled and strung on a shoelace. For your rack, the captain said, when you forget what you did. I won't, Red said, voice thick. You will, Abrams said, not unkindly. Because you'll feed men and wash pans and cuss coffee, and that's how we live through wars. We normalize miracles. This, he lifted the nut, is for when the ocean's quiet and you need it noisy again. They stood and watched the sun set. Men do that at sea, like they can hold the world on a string for 5 minutes. 15. A quieter predator. If you make noise, the enemy adapts. Kruger adapted. He stopped chasing the loudest thing. He hunted the holes, the quiet between two escorts, the scene where one foxer scream fell off and the next hadn't begun. He made a map of absence. It worked. On a wet black Tuesday, he put a single eel into the kidney of a tanker named Cedar Ash, and the night blue-orange. The convoy shuddered. The Avery went angry and turned its stern into a cannon mouth of depth charges. Kruger escaped by shedding ballast and sliding down the layer like a snake in cold grass. On the plot table, Red saw the shape of the wound. "We're making a wall," he said, "but walls have doors. We didn't lock the door. Let's tap the map." Then we changed the song. Overlap the foxers. Cross-beat the noise. Make the holes scream too. Abrams looked at his men, the cook, the mathematician, the captain with a farmer's face, and nodded. Make the holes sing. 16. The night the sea broke. They tested the new pattern under a sky that looked ripped by claws. 2 foxers per escort staggered. The ocean became a noisy quilt, every patch stitched to the next. Lutz's scope turned to snow, his ears clogged with chaos. "God help them," he whispered, meaning the men below. Kruger heard an ocean with 1,000 throats and no mouth. He made a decision only brave men make. He went home. He wrote a report that used the word unerträglich, unbearable. Somewhere in a German office, a man with tidy hair clenched his jaw because the math said the ocean had become unfair. 17. The cost. No trick is free. Towing foxers burned fuel. It rattled bolts loose. It masked your own sonar if you weren't careful. On a bad sea, a foxer could drag you crooked. Men cursed the noise the way miners curse the darkness. Intimately necessary. Red kept a log. Plates replaced, lines spliced, things that broke. Next to it, he kept another, things that lived. Pretty belle. Cedar Ash, lost, but most hands saved. A Norwegian freighter crew who sent a cake, made with whale oil, because butter was gone. He added up the columns with greasy thumbs. Life still owed him. 18. Shanghai Brown. Sailors call every port by a woman's name. In Londonderry, they called Whiskey Shanghai Brown because it put you in trouble and brought you back with a grin. Red and Lutz snuck a night ashore between convoys. In a pub where the piano had 3 teeth missing, a British petty officer lifted a glass. "To the idiot Yanks who made the sea scream," he said. Red lifted his back. "You're welcome." The petty officer added, "Our boffins, smart sorts, call your racket a foxer. I call a fox in the hen house, and we've plenty foxes of our own. But here's the thing, Yanks, we didn't just save ships. You made time. Time to get more escorts. Time to get more birds in the sky. Time to teach the ocean to hate sharks." Red wrote the words on a beer mat. Make time. He'd never thought of it that way. He slept that night like a man who found a door in a dream and dared open it. 19. The letter you don't send. There's a kind of letter sailors write and never mail. Red wrote one to Kruger, whose name he didn't know. "Dear enemy, I made a thing of noise to keep you from hearing my friends. You made a map of silence to kill them anyway. We are both smart. We are both tired. One day the ocean will stop being ours. Until then, I will keep rattling the door and you will keep trying to latch. I hope we both live to be bored." He folded it into his locker behind the brass nut and a postcard of a lake that wasn't the Atlantic. 20. The storm before dawn. On a night when the wind twisted like wire, the convoy slid into a storm that felt personal. Waves reared like black buildings and crashed in glass. The Avery towed 2 foxers, the warship's backbone aching with every slam. "Contact!" Lutz shouted suddenly. "Close! Bearing 090. Breaking through the seam." Abrams didn't have time to be eloquent. "Full ahead. Hedgehog, fire!" The Hedgehog, forward-thrown spigots, coughed fireflies into the dark. They arced and sank, a deadly constellation. Then the sea pounded 1, 2, 3, like a giant's fist in a barrel. A sour stink rose. Oil. Bits you never name. Got him, Lutz said, voice very small. Red gripped the rail until his knuckles burned. He had wanted to save everyone, even the men who tried to kill him. Tonight the ocean made him choose. He chose his convoy. The storm hissed. Dawn bled up like a bruise. Somewhere beyond the horizon, a man named Kruger listened to the quiet and felt very old. 21. The thing with feathers. Next morning a sparrow, how it got there God only knows, landed on the Avery's stack, soaked, shivering. Red cupped it in his hands. He fed it crumbs. It hopped on the brass nut that hung from his bunk and pecked at its reflection. Hope is a stupid bird, Lutz said, watching. Yeah, Red said. And it keeps flying. 22 orders. Orders came like weather. Proceed, western approaches. Join on, 176. Expect heavy subactivity. Continue evaluation of towed decoy. A type line added, almost human. Good work. Abrams posted the orders and went to the galley. He didn't ask for coffee. He leaned on the steel table while Red kneaded dough. You changed the way the ocean sounds, Abrams said. Red looked at his hands. I just listened when a pantry door rattled. That's why we win, Abrams said, and smiled in a way that made him look younger and more tired at once. We listen to everything, even stupid doors. He pushed off the table. Get some sleep, Malloy. Part 2 is always worse. Red laughed. Aye, sir. He didn't sleep. He dreamed of an ocean full of keys, each one noisy, each one opening a door to a convoy that made it home. The sea woke mean and gray. A lid slammed on a pot. The Avery's decks sweated brine. The Foxers stamped and rattled in tow like angry tin saints. Men moved softer now, as if noise itself had become a weapon you could handle wrong. Word filtered through the wardroom that Berlin had loosed a new trick, an acoustic torpedo that hunted the loudest thing it could hear. Sailors gave it 100 nicknames before breakfast. The one that stuck had teeth, a gnat with a steel stinger. Red Malloy kneaded bread in the galley and watched the dough rise the way a man watches weather. He could feel the ship listening, every bulkhead in the ear. The brass nut from the first rattlejack kissed the edge of a porthole with each swell and chimed a quiet, private bell. Lutz slid into the doorway. Headphones looped around his neck like a stethoscope. They'll shoot for the scream, he said. That's us. Red dusted flour off his palms. Then we make a scream that isn't us. You already did, Lutz said, meaning the Foxers. Question is whether it's enough. Captain Abrams entered without ceremony and leaned his shoulder to the steel as if the hull might be tired. Convoy on, 176 by noon, he said. Intelligence says 3 packs in the approaches, all hungry. Bureau boys want live evaluation of our hardware. I told them they can have all the live they want, so long as my ships stay that way. The Avery met the convoy under a sky the color of lead filings. 30 merchant hulls shouldered west, each stacked with a different kind of war. Flour, fuel, fighters in crates. A piano for a mess hall no one believed they'd ever see. The escorts took their places like wolves that had decided to be shepherds instead. On the Avery's stern, the twin Foxers groaned as if they could feel the gnat coming. Night drew itself over the sea like blackout cloth. The first flare of trouble was not seen but felt, a tug in the bones, a notch in the wind. Lutz's lips moved without words as he counted a rhythm only he heard. He looked up, eyes changed. High-speed transient. Rail bang. He's launched. Abrams did the only thing a man can do when the ocean throws a spear at your heartbeat. Bring the racket up, he said, voice bell flat. Keep our screws clean. If it homes on loudest, make sure loudest is 300 feet behind my ship. The Foxer screamed like something wholly being torn. Somewhere down the convoy line, another escort had done it wrong. Her own decoy whined too close, and the sea punched her in the back with a white fist. For 10 heartbeats, the Avery could see the other ship's stern rise like a surprised animal and then drop. She lived. Men hooped and then looked ashamed of themselves for it. The second torpedo did not choose wrong. It curved on a hungry arc for the Avery's wake, homed on the choir of fury Red had built and nested in the Foxer's iron throat. The detonation tore a hole in the ocean big enough to swallow a truck. The Avery's stern lurched. Bolts screamed like violin strings, and something heavy skittered through the galley and hit Red's shin. He hissed, then laughed without humor. "Good girl," he told the decoy, as if it were a mule that had taken a kick that belonged to a man. By dawn, the convoy still moved. They counted that as wealth. News of the Nat spread between ships faster than radio, and with more superstition. Each captain had a way he liked his noise: slack on the starboard line, taut on port, staggered toe depth, a prayer or a curse before deploying. The bureau engineer, Harity, reappeared with a stamped crate and a grin that had slept 3 hours in as many days. "We tune the plates," he said, patting the Foxer like a horse. "Cavitates where their ears are keenest. We put a vein on a vein so it can dance without ripping your stern off. And we added what you asked." "I asked for nothing," Abrams said. "You asked by implication," Harity replied. "A breakaway coupling. If the torpedo insists on proposing marriage to your noisemaker, you cut the rope and let them elope." They train on a line that never looked straight for more than a minute. Red watched from the taffrail, face salted white with spray. He didn't like the breakaway couplings. There was something in him that hated the idea of letting anything go into that black mouth alone. But he had asked the ocean to be complicated, and it had obliged. The next attack came quick and ugly. No courtship. A U-boat slid through a blind spot the escorts hadn't yet taught themselves to fear. "Let's cut the launch," shouted, and the Avery did the violent dance that keeps you alive. The coupling popped like a dry twig. The Foxer skipped once, twice, and vanished into the hole the torpedo made for it. The shock lifted half the convoy on a pulse of water and then set everything down crooked. After, there was only the sound of plates complaining and men swallowing. "Mark that," Abrams said, voice steady because other voices weren't. "We'll make too many of those, but we'll do it on purpose, not by accident." All day, submarines hunted the holes. Red and Lutz and the engineer redrew the song. The overlaps, the change-ups, the pauses a human ear needed and a machine might not. By dusk, the noise quilt had no seams a clever wolf could find twice. Somewhere out in the weather, Kruger listened to a sea that had turned into a factory where all the machines were broken and working at once. He had stopped chasing the brightest scream and now hunted the absence. He drew bearing lines on a slick table with a chinograph pencil and told himself he could still be smarter than the ocean. He couldn't. Not always. That night, he took a shot at a hole that wasn't a hole, and the Avery answered with a hedgehog burst that stung, but didn't kill. The U-boat bled a little oil and went quiet as a secret. The convoy, insulted but intact, slid on. In Argentia again, the Avery tied up as if afraid the pier might drift off. Harity's men took measurements the way doctors take blood. Cheerful, invasive, necessary. A British officer with chalk on his sleeve and a voice like a violin case introduced himself as Blackett and asked Red what had made him sure a rotten door could teach the Atlantic to shout. "Because it was exactly the wrong frequency for sleep," Red said, "and the U-boat wants sleep more than I do." "Quite," Blackett said, scratching at his notes. "Then we should consider sleep as an operational objective." Red blinked. "Sir, rob him of it," Blackett said, as if he were ordering tea. "Noise where his ears live, numbers where his pride lives, and time where his orders don't." They put Red in a room with chalk and men who like to argue with graphs. He hated it and loved it and washed up from it with a mind that felt rinsed. When he stepped back on the Avery, he had 3 new ways to lash a Foxer. A schedule for when to eat bread, so your hands weren't shaking when it mattered, and a sentence that wouldn't leave. Make time. The convoy that followed was a big one, too rich for luck. Fog arrived with it, a fog that tasted like wet tin. The sea went white and small. Escorts lived inside their circles. Merchants lived inside their fear. Somewhere in that milk, a U-boat's periscope made a thought mark and then withdrew like a boy embarrassed to have stared. Midnight came like a tired joke and then turned into a judgment. Let's heard the torpedo rail slam and the tight squeal of an eel leaving home and did not have to say anything because his body did. The Avery was already turning. The Foxers were already two fists on two long arms. A gnat beeline for the loud and found a decoy at the end of a cable. The cable had snapped like a living thing and broke clean as a promise. The detonation came late because the Foxer wallowed and then was gone. What no one expected was the second launch, a smarter enemy or a dumber one. The difference is academic to a dead man. The second torpedo did not listen to the first scream. It listened to the hole the scream had been yelling into. It aimed there. It ran there. And in that split second of intending to be fatal, a British corvette cut across the gap, her own Foxer singing too close. Some part of physics or mercy tipped the torpedo's ear degree. It fell in love with the corvette's tin bride instead. The blow picked her up, set her down wrong, and she learned to limp with 3 decks afloat and 1 flooded. She lived because steel sometimes remembers intentions long enough to forgive a mistake. When the fog thinned to something a man could name, they saw wreckage and not enough of it. That meant mercy had been expensive, but not ruin. The convoy counted and came up even enough to call victory. 2 days later, the sea sat down. The sky peeled blue from a hidden stack. Men hung socks on lines between depth charge racks and laughed in a way that made you want to wrap the sound in paper and keep it. Red wrote his mother about bread and didn't write about the sound a torpedo makes when it is sure. Abrams came to the galley at sunset and laid a folded paper on the steel. Orders, he said, were to shepherd 1 more lot through the gate and then hand the route to new boys with new toys. We're also to put 2 of Harity's clean factory Foxers on loan to the Canadian escorts and show them how to make them scream like sinners. Red smiled at the wording. You make it sound like we're being put out to stud. Don't tempt Providence, Abrams said. It's vindictive and has a sense of humor. The last convoy before relief felt like a dare. The wolf packs came as a committee, one to bleed on the radio, one to probe the edges, one to punch. Lutz worked until his ears rang without headphones, catching bearing shifts with the part of the mind that's more ankle than brain. Dana in the engine room cursed the couplings that popped when they should and twice when they shouldn't. The Avery kept stepping where the ocean said not to step and not dying as a result. On the second night, a submarine did something beautiful and wrong. He rose to periscope depth in a wash of phosphor and let the sea paint his wake silver. Lutz didn't hear it. He saw it, a ghost line moving fast where lines shouldn't. Hedgehogs went out like a handful of lit prayers, and the ocean stamped them flat. Oil bled up in an embarrassed halo. A minute later, a deck planking the size of a coffin bobbed up, and then nothing but a smell. The men on the Avery went quiet and busy. Red set down a loaf and picked up a bucket and scrubbed a patch of deck that didn't need it. Write it down, Chief, Abrams said to Lutz later. Write that one down as a cost. When land finally hove up, British hills like knuckles under a blanket, the Avery slid past a pier hung with flags and bad coffee. A boy in a cap bigger than his head waved an American flag that had seen only good weather. A woman on the pier didn't wave. She pressed her hand to her mouth and looked at the ship as if she had known its name before it had one. Harity met them with a bundle of sheets and a smile that refused to be sensible. Numbers, he said. Yours and theirs. Less math than music. It's working. Not a wand. Not a wall. A wedge. You hold space open and, gentlemen, when you hold space open in a war that eats time, you win more than ships. Blackett wrote them a note on nice paper that smelled of chalk. Thank you for the noise. Please accept in exchange a little order. We found that less can be more if it is smarter. Teach this to the ones who come behind, and we will dignify your racket with equations. Let's tack the note up where men had to read it to get coffee. Kruger, who would never meet these men, brought his boat home to a pier where the tide slapped stone with an accusatory hand. He stood on a wet deck and tried to put into German the feeling of being outnumbered by noise. He chose the word unbearable again, and then crossed it out and wrote inevitable, and then crossed that out too. He settled, finally, on ungerecht, unfair, because he needed to blame something he could pronounce. The staff captain nodded like a banker and then sent him out again with a torpedo that had more brains and less patience. The Avery got one night in a pub with a piano, still had 3 teeth missing, and Red allowed himself a whiskey that put his ears to sleep. Let's play a song on those 3 teeth and one that wasn't there and made 4 notes sound like a hymn. Men who were alive drank to men who were not, and it didn't help, and it did. Orders took the Avery back out before the ash in the galley stove had cooled. The North Atlantic had a long memory and no pity. It also had rules, and men who learned them. This time when the Nat came hunting, the Foxers were already stacked like lies on lies, the overlaps tuned, the couplings ready to break in a way that made engineers proud. The first torpedo took a decoy the way a crow takes foil. The second searched for a hole and found a stitch seam. The third never came because the U-boat commander had saved it, as if thrift could outvote physics. Dawn came blue and beautiful and undeserved. The convoy made land by a margin a man could measure with his hand. A long day later, on a long pier, a longshoreman with hands like Weather tucked a cigarette behind his ear and said, You boys the ones with the rattles? Someone laughed like a bark. We all got rattles, he said. Ours just work. They unloaded a world. Flour, fuel, fighters in crates, a piano. Men unloaded the piano last, tender as a child, and walked it down a gangway into a city that had swaggered through fire. Someone played 3 teeth of a tune, and the city laughed back. When the Avery turned for home, Red wrote his mother about bread, and about a bird that had sat on his bunk and pecked a brass nut, and about a sound that had saved strangers. He did not write about the letter he had written to an enemy and folded behind the nut. He did not have to. Captain Abrams called him to the bridge for a ceremony that wasn't one. He handed Red a small box and said nothing. Inside was a ribbon that meant less than the bread Red had baked and more than the noise he had made. Red closed the box and said, Sir, can I hang in the galley next to the note about boiling water? You can, Abrams said. Just don't let the steam take the starch out of it. They stood at the forward rail under a sky, so clean it made you suspicious. The Avery sliced a neat V into a sea that had forgotten, for the moment, how to kill. Let's lean beside them and listen to nothing, which was everything. Dana came up in the engine room smelling like hot metal and good temper and told a joke about bearings that made them groan. Harity sent a signal that said simply, production ramping. Expect improved units. Recommend training package codename, dinner bell. Red grinned at that and wrote it in chalk over the scuttlebutt. The ocean was not one. It is never one. But a corridor through it had been held open by will and wire and a cook's stubborn ear. Other men and other machines would widen that corridor until even a piano could pass and arrive in a hall where it could be tuned and played and heard. One night, long after the last convoy of that season had laid its white wake across a gray map, a sparrow returned, or another that looked like it. It rode the warm air above the galley stove, shook water off itself like a dog, and perched on the brass nut. Red held out a crumb. The bird took it and did a rude little hop and flew off through a vent whose mesh someone had promised to fix and never had. Lutz, who had watched the exchange, said, Hope's a stupid bird. Red, who had not slept enough in months and felt young only when the bread rose correctly, said, And it keeps flying. Years later, when the ocean's voice had shifted again, when men wrote books that tried and failed to capture how wet fear can be, when engines were quieter and math was louder, an old cook walked through a museum. In a glass case sat a tidy factory Foxer, painted gray, and labeled in a font that had never seen salt. A card explained its frequencies and its physics and the number of ships it had saved, which was wrong by some margin because numbers can't count the way a man breathes easier. The old cook read the card and smiled, and then noticed, lying at the base of the case as if forgotten by the curator or forgiven by time, a single brass nut with a hole drilled through it. He touched the glass the way sailors touch a name on a wall. Then he kept walking until he found a window. Beyond it, the ocean was doing the only thing it knows, moving. He listened to it because that's what had started everything. It did not sound quiet. It sounded alive. Back in another country in another decade, a man who had once been called Kruger sat at a table where the wood remembered glasses. He had a grandson with a paper boat and a bathtub and a word for every part of ship except fear. The old man taught the boy to cup his ear to the tub and listen. "What do you hear?" the boy asked, eyes delighted. "Everything," the old man said, and he smiled in a way that had taken him half a life to learn. On a pier where paint peeled, a merchant sailor who had lifted sacks of flour and a piano remembered the Avery passing with two screaming saints in tow and the way life sometimes chooses you because you choose it back. He told his daughter about noise that saved bread, and she told her daughter. The story got some details wrong and the right thing right. In a school with a music room paid for by money that once bought wire rope, a teacher hung a sign that said, "Listen even to the stupid door." Children didn't understand it until one day they did, and then they understood a great deal else besides. As for the Avery, she wore rust the way a boxer wears scars. She lived past the months men had allotted. She taught crews who had never seen Iceland why you do not trust a sea that pretends friendship. In her galley there was a nail by the scuttle, and, hanging from it, a ribbon that steam had robbed of stiffness and a nut that never lost its shine. Men touched them on the way out at 4 in the morning and called it ritual or superstition or habit. It felt like time. When Red Malloy finally slept the sleep of somebody who has earned it and apologized to no one, he dreamed of an ocean with keys in it. Some made screams that saved strangers. Some made songs only birds could hear. All of them opened the same door, a narrow one, noisy, stubborn, human, through which convoys slid and bread and pianos and children who grew up to be impossible. He woke with the sound in his chest and knew he would always be able to find it. If the sea ever got too quiet, he'd rattle something until it wasn't. And if the enemy ever learned to love the noise, well, then they'd change the song. The ocean will never be quiet, not while men cross it for reasons that matter, not while cooks listen for rotten doors, not while sparrows keep finding ships in weather too hard for wings.